The Ballistics of Fear, Book 1 of the Fear Equation Trilogy, by Peter Lamb. Prologue, The First Shot.
Phoenix, Arizona, 11:37 a.m. A Tuesday so ordinary it almost dared the universe to leave it alone. A coffee vendor smiled at a customer. A busker tuned his guitar. A child tugged on her mother's sleeve, asking for ice cream before lunch. And then, one soundless shockwave rolled through the plaza. A man in a blue shirt collapsed face first onto the tiles. No scream, no warning, just a body meeting the ground. The guitar fell silent, the coffee cup shattered, and the world forgot how to breathe. Within 90 seconds, the first live stream began. Within 6 minutes, 28,000 people had seen him die. Within 12, cable news called it terrorism. But it wasn't. It was the first equation. One-shot death, 10,000 terrified.
Order is a myth built by the comfortable. Fear reminds them what truth feels like.
The shooter packed his rifle into a plain black case, zipped it closed, and walked into the sunlight. A tourist among the frightened. No one looked twice. He boarded a bus, and by the time the first police helicopter circled overhead, he was already gone. Chapter 1, Dr. Isla Calder arrives. Dr. Isla Calder hated American airports. Too bright, too loud, too many screens shouting welcome and bye at the same time. She adjusted her satchel strap and muttered something in Scots under her breath that made a TSA officer frown. Her arrival had been planned months ago, a 3-week visiting lectureship at Georgetown University on the psychology of fear. A small irony that would later make her famous. She wasn't a detective, not officially, but when a woman's brain ran at 110 frames a second and never found the off switch, academia was merely camouflage. At 38, Isla Calder was a paradox in motion, all logic on the outside, all lightning on the inside. She wore dark-rimmed glasses that made her look perpetually unimpressed, and a tweed coat from another century that smelled faintly of pipe smoke and chalk dust. Her students adored her. Her colleagues didn't know what to do with her. She carried no mobile phone by choice, only a leather notebook full of sketches, numbers, and lines that seemed to dance when you looked too long. At the taxi rank, she caught a glimpse of a news screen showing the Phoenix Plaza, the grainy freeze frame of the victim mid-fall.
"One bullet," she murmured. "Too precise for chance. Too clean for chaos." The driver, an older man with weary eyes, glanced at her in the mirror. "Crazy world, huh?" She nodded absently, but her mind was already elsewhere, tracing invisible geometry between the words Phoenix and fear.
Her lectures had titles like The Architecture of Panic and Pattern Recognition in Nonlinear Crime. She didn't teach how to catch killers. She taught how to understand them, or more accurately, how to outthink them. Every serial act, she told her students, was a mirror. And every mirror showed two faces. At her Georgetown flat, she unpacked 3 items onto the desk. A battered fountain pen, a flask of Highland whiskey, and a chess piece, a black bishop chipped on one corner. It was a relic from a case years ago in Edinburgh, her first glimpse into what fear could make people do. She poured a finger of whiskey, turned on the radio, and sat by the window overlooking M Street.
The newscaster's voice came through static. "Authorities still have no leads in the Phoenix shooting. The FBI has ruled out terrorism, but cannot determine motive. Witnesses describe a single suppressed shot and chaos spreading instantly." Isla scribbled a note. Single shot equals maximum psychological yield. Then another, not terror, experiment. "Someone's measuring reactions," she said aloud. "Testing fear like a scientist tests pressure." Her cat Ptolemy blinked at her from the windowsill as if unimpressed.
By midnight, she had filled 3 pages, diagrams of city grids, time zones, and psychological feedback loops, each ending with the same phrase, "If he does it again, it's not random." And of course, he would.
Fear is the purest instrument. One strike in one city, and the herd scatters across continents. They measure casualties in numbers. I measure them in silence.
Somewhere, hundreds of miles away, Nathaniel Cross cleaned the barrel of his custom rifle with the precision of a surgeon. He wasn't thinking about the man he'd killed. He was thinking about the data. Each panicked scream was a data point. Each breaking news broadcast, a ripple in his grand equation. He opened a small leather notebook, identical in make to Isla's, and drew a spiral. One circle for Phoenix, the next would be Chicago.
1 per city, a study of panic propagation. When the last circle closes, the pattern will reveal itself.
In Washington, a Scottish professor stared at her sketches, unaware that somewhere out there, a man with the same notebook had already begun the next page. Two minds moving on parallel tracks. Neither knew they were about to collide. Both believed they were right.
Fear spreads faster than truth. Awesome, continuing straight on. Chapter 2, The Second City.
Dawn came late to Washington that morning, as if reluctant to climb over the skyline. Dr. Isla Calder woke not to her alarm, but to the machine logic of American morning television. Phoenix replayed on loop. Commentators leaned into words like senseless and unprovoked until the syllables wore thin. She clicked the sound off and let the captions crawl. Then across the bottom of the screen, a new headline rolled. Breaking. Second one-shot killing in Chicago. The photographs were familiar before they appeared. A city square filled with ordinary errands, then an absence carved into the day. The Chicago victim's sweater was red. Isla would remember that because the plaza tiles beneath him were a cold granite blue, and the contrast lodged like glass behind her eyes.
2 points make a line, she thought, but only if they were placed with intention. She pulled a rubber band from her wrist and snapped it against her palm, a habit she hated but trusted. The sting pulled her attention into the present. In the notebook, she drew a small black dot for Phoenix, a second dot for Chicago. She used no names, just coordinates and the faintest of arrows, as if the page itself wanted to breathe quietly. What did you measure the first time? What did you change the second?
Isla had lectured about replication to bored students who mistook it for repetition. The difference mattered. Repetition was compulsion. Replication was proof. If Phoenix was hypothesis, Chicago was method. She froze the TV image with a remote and stood an arm's length away. The camera angle was terrible. News producers loved chaos. They distrusted geometry. Still, the streetlights behind the cordon made a stuttering line. The sun, low and off-screen, threw a slant of light across a bronze statue, a Civil War officer pointing nowhere in particular. The shadow of his outstretched arm fell across the taped perimeter like a sundial. Isla's eyes narrowed. She walked to the window and checked the actual sky, then the map apps she didn't like but tolerated on a battered tablet she used for travel. Sun azimuth, at that hour, in that part of Chicago, would place the light at approximately 111 degrees from north.
Shooters pick positions. Philosophers pick symbols. Which one are you? She took a ruler, wood, not plastic, and laid it across the screen, aligning the statue's shadow with the victim's collapsed body and a distant glass facade. It wasn't perfect, but it was rhythmic. A triangle that didn't look accidental. Her phone, an old flip she kept for administrators and customs officials, buzzed with a text from Georgetown. Confirmation, tonight's lecture, Architecture of Panic, moved to 7 p.m. Overflow Hall. Media requests pending. Please advise. She closed the phone. Then she smiled, a humorless, private smile. Media requests. Of course, we love our monsters tidy and televised.
The Chicago live feed showed the aftermath from a dozen angles. Isla screen-captured 3, printed them on cheap hotel paper, and taped them to the wall with surgical precision. She annotated nothing with words, only lines and arcs, a cartographer mapping currents rather than continents. The geometry whispered. Sun angle, sightline, a peculiar respect for straight edges interrupted by a single deliberate curve where no curve should be, the path of a bullet through a window that must have been opened and closed again.
You didn't hunt the man, she decided. You hunted the city. She drew an arrow from the statue's shadow to a rooftop with a faded mural and wrote A. She circled the curved reflection in the window and wrote B. She marked the body's final orientation and wrote C. Triangle ABC, simple if you ignored the human heart inside it.
They will name the dead. They will rank sorrow as if grief were a scoreboard. They will ask why. I will give them a shape instead. Chicago wakes in lattices and right angles. Phoenix sprawled. Both except one truth, one shock, and the grid splinters. I chose the angles to speak a language older than their headlines.
By noon, Isla had a working hypothesis she did not yet trust. The shooter had aligned each killing to a local symbol's shadow line, converting civic pride into a sighting rope for fear. A city points at itself, she wrote longhand. You pulled the trigger. She did not call the police, she did not call the FBI. She called a bird watcher. Rena, she said when the woman answered, her voice sleep-warm. It's Isla, I need the song of a city. Which city, and do we charge extra for poetry? Chicago downtown this morning, what was singing? Rena volunteered for one of those citizen science platforms Isla adored, mapping bird migrations against urban noise. Rena's datasets were a minor miracle. Starlings were thick up Michigan Avenue at dawn, Rena said. Robins, quieter. You can hear the starlings in a lot of the live streams, actually. Why? No reason, Isla lied kindly. Do starlings stutter when something pulses at high frequency? Ultrasound. They hate it. Everyone hates it, but starlings show it. Why? No reason, Isla said again, and her pen circled B. Ultrasonic range finding, a handheld emitter to seat the shot, a pre-pulse to fix the distance. Maybe, maybe not. The birds would tattle if the humans did not. She thanked Rena, hung up, and marked the hallway lamp with a post-it, reminding herself to breathe. Georgetown overflowed that evening, the air sticky with anticipation and recycled HVAC. Isla disliked microphones. They made her feel like a fraud in an arena. She spoke without slides and began with the sentence the dean would least prefer. Fear is a function, not a feeling. A few students laughed, most leaned forward. Imagine panic as a contagion, she said, chalking a simple curve on a board she'd dragged out of a storeroom because whiteboards offended her. Now imagine a mind that wants to study it, not for cruelty, for data. What is the minimum input that maximizes output? A hand rose. Are you talking about Phoenix? And Chicago, she said, 2 inputs, similar outputs, no signature, no message. That's a message. Like a serial killer, another asked. Serials escalate, she said. They devour. This replicates. It proves. He fires one shot not because he must, but because any more would contaminate the experiment. Murmurs. An older man in the second row with a law enforcement haircut stared as if cataloging her for later. He would wait until after to ask her if she had contacts in the bureau, if she had a consultancy, if she would like one. She would say no. She finished with the graph she hadn't meant to draw, 2 points and a third hovering at the edge of her chalk. She did not place it. The room did in their silence. They came to her in a trickle, earnest questions, nervous smiles, one woman who cried without warning and told Isla she'd been near the Chicago Plaza and couldn't stop hearing the absence afterward. Isla put a hand on her shoulder and said nothing clever. She simply stood there until the woman's breathing slowed. On her walk back, the rain lifted but left the world glistening, as if washed and not yet dried. She cut down a narrow side street past a church whose bells were always a little flat, and stopped when the street lamp shadow crossed her path at a strange exact angle.
Azimuth, she paced backward, then forward, aligning the lamp's shadow with a sewer grate and the peak of a brownstone roof. The angle reproduced triangle ABC in miniature. She laughed once, surprised and a little giddy. The city offered her a proof the size of her stride. Back at her desk, she pulled U.S. Geological Survey sun angle tables for the next 10 days. She thumbed through them the way some priests thumb rosaries, comforted by the math. She calculated, then recalculated, then drew a line curving across the map like a thrown ribbon. If the shooter preferred cold geometry and morning light, if he prized civic symbolism and straight lines that wove meaning, then a third city with a certain east-facing monument would serve. It wasn't a prediction yet. It was a whisper with teeth. She slept 2 hours and dreamed in lattices.
Replication complete. The second city confirms yield. Variables: sun angle, reflective surface, crowd density. Constant. Silence afterward. She is here. A pause almost human. Not in Chicago. Not yet, but in the grid. Something arranged against me that isn't police. A voice under the chatter. He had read the summaries of Isla's lecture, drawn from student posts and a paraphrased university press release. He had watched a grainy phone clip of her chalkboard from the last row, hand steady, voice unhurried, refusing the performance hunger of American audiences. Fear is a function, she had said, and he had smiled without liking the sensation. Yes, he whispered now to the empty room, and functions can be inverted.
The third city was not chosen by the FBI. It was chosen by a line of morning light Isla sketched across a map, and a peculiar fondness for rooftops that were easier to exit than to enter. She checked municipal schedules, parade permits, any event that would convene a crowd at a predictable hour. She avoided patriotic spectacles. The shooter had shown no taste for flags. He liked the quiet rituals of commerce and commute. She circled 3 possibilities, a farmer's market in St. Louis, a transportation hub in Denver, and a waterfront promenade in Baltimore. She eliminated Baltimore first, too many variables in the harbor wind. She set St. Louis aside, then drew a faint ring around Denver that was not yet a circle.
Don't name it, she told herself, not yet. Names make things arrogant. She bought a train ticket she might not use, and packed with the deliberate indecision of a gambler who plays to odds, not luck. Notebook, Bishop, a torn page from a field guide to starlings. Before bed, she opened her laptop to a blog she never advertised. A stubbornly plain page with 3 readers on a good day, none of them trolls. She typed, Chaos Diary Entry 41, 2 points, 2 mornings, 2 shadows pointing where no one was looking. If this mind values elegance over appetite, he will not escalate violence. He will escalate clarity. She hovered over Publish, then closed the lid without pressing it. The entry nodded in the dark, half-born.
The local station wanted an expert, so they summoned 3. A criminologist from a think tank, a former SWAT commander, and a woman who'd written a bestseller with the word evil on the dust jacket. Isla watched from her kitchen with tea that wouldn't cool. Monsters escalate, said the bestseller calmly. Not necessarily, said the SWAT commander. Sometimes the point is to show you they can. Then what's the motive? Asked the anchor, who wore concern like a well-tailored suit. A brief silence. Then, chaos, they said almost together. Isla shut the TV off with a gentle thud and muttered to Ptolemy, If 3 experts say chaos, it's a design.
They call it chaos when they do not see the axis. I am not erratic. I am precise. The second city was a chord above the first, not a scream. He considered the third. Climatic consistency. Police response times. The noise floor of a downtown morning. The availability of an egress route that did not require theatrics or disguise. Denver tempted him. Clear light, obedient streets, a skyline you could read like a psalm. But Denver also flirted with altitude and errant winds that teased bullets into drifting where they were not invited. He turned to St. Louis again. The arch made a good teacher to bad students. Cliché. He had no interest in clichés. Baltimore's harbor would glitter like a lure to lesser minds. He closed the folder on it without a second thought. He sliced an apple with a pocket knife that had been his father's and felt no memory at all. Grief had been structured out of him by discipline. What remained was appetite's ghost. Curiosity cut to the bone. 1 per city, he reminded himself, because more would be gluttony, because more would lie.
Isla bought a one-way plane ticket to Denver and did not tell the university. She emailed the dean a paragraph about field research and turned off the flip phone after sending it. Silence wasn't safety, but it trimmed variables and soothed the brain. On the plane, she refused the drink and asked the flight attendant for a cup of ice. With the plastic cup sweating on her tray, she drew a triangle in the condensation with her fingertip and labeled it A, B, C. Then she smeared it away like a magician hiding a coin. She read a 1987 paper on crowd panic that hinted at nonlinearity and the myth of the panic stampede, and penciled a note, "We always blame the herd. Sometimes it's the geometry." The man in the adjacent seat leaned over, friendly. "Work or vacation?" "Experiment," she said and closed her eyes. Denver offered itself with a bright, unfussy sky and a grid that made her Scottish heart suspicious. Too tidy, too eager to cooperate. She walked the blocks around Union Station before dawn with a pocket compass and the small thrill of breaking rules no one would arrest her for. She counted pigeons, watched the curl of steam from street vents, and smiled at a woman in a green coat who nodded back as if recognizing a fellow conspirator. At 7:03 a.m., the sun found the lip of a glass tower and laid a blade of light across the station clock. Isla stood where the blade cut the pavement and traced its course to a rooftop where a graffiti artist had once painted a fox and then been fined for it.
Here, she didn't say it aloud. She placed a hand flat on the stone and felt the city's hum. An innocent thing, a consequential one. She mapped egress routes, an exterior staircase in shadow, a maintenance ladder, a skylight that would oblige with a soft complaint, but open. She pictured line of sight. She pictured wind. She pictured a man who didn't need to hurry because he didn't need to repeat himself. At 7:26, when commuters were most choreographed, a flock of starlings folded and refolded above the plaza like paper. The fold stuttered, once, twice, then smoothed. Ultrasonic pulse. Rena's birdsong came back to her like a friend knocking. She turned in a slow circle and listened for what wasn't there. The city had a noise floor. This morning, someone had shaved it thin. She checked her watch and did not like the time. The interval between Phoenix and Chicago had been 31 hours. The interval between Chicago and now, if now arrived, would be longer. He wasn't accelerating, he was arranging. But the morning had that expectant stillness of an orchestra before the conductor lifts his hand. She stepped back under the awning of a coffee stall, ordered an espresso she didn't want, and used the mirror-bright chrome of the machine to watch the rooftop she had chosen choose her back.
The shot did not come. The plaza breathed. Seagulls argued about a crumb of bread as if coastal jurisdiction applied to them here. People moved in counts of 3 and 4 and 5. No rupture, no fold. The hum of the city thickened back to normal. Isla let the breath go and hated the disappointment snaking through relief.
You're not craving violence, she told herself. You're craving proof. She waited another hour. Nothing. She chose a second vantage and a third, more out of stubbornness than faith, then called it, and walked 2 long, ordinary miles back to a hotel with bad lobby art and an excellent habit of not asking questions. In the room, she lay on the carpet like a chalk outline and stared at the ceiling. Then she sat up and laughed. Genuinely this time. He adapted. You're not the only one doing math.
She traveled, he said to no one. Good. Curiosity is a vice I forgive in others when it flatters me. He had considered Denver. He had run the numbers and chosen not to prefer them. Too many lenses in a small radius, too much glass. A city that pretended to be simple but enjoyed optical tricks. He did not need mirrors. He wanted clarity. He checked his own maps and let his finger rest on a different city whose mornings smelled of salt and pretended they were honest about it. Not yet, he promised the map. Soon.
Isla recalibrated. She emptied the page of Denver, a light erase, not a strike, and redrew her curve. She added windrose diagrams not because they changed the answer, but because they soothed the process. She texted Rena a thank you and a question about ultrasonic signatures in coastal cities. She returned to her dormant blog and published the entry she'd withheld, then added a line, Addendum. When an experiment resists replication, the experimenter isn't wrong. The framing is. She closed the laptop and let the city hum. The flip phone, traitorous and obedient, vibrated with a number she didn't recognize. She ignored it. It vibrated again. She answered. Dr. Calder, this is Special Agent Dillon with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I'm not consulting, she said. Understood, he said. He did not sound pleased. You gave a lecture last night that raised interest. I gave a lecture that raised questions. We have some of those, he said, off the record. She looked at the ceiling as if it might offer an exit ramp. I can give you what I have and insist you don't call it insight. We'll take what we can get, Dillon said. Also a paper shuffle, performative. You're in Denver. She let the silence do the work. Dr. Calder, he said finally, if you think you've predicted something. I think I haven't, she said, which is its own prediction. He laughed once, despite himself. You're not like our usual experts. Your usual experts are usually wrong, she said, and hung up before she could decide to be kinder. Night found her at the window, watching the city invert itself in the glass. She held the bishop in her hand, thumb worrying the chip in its edge until it warmed to her skin. She thought of the red sweater against the blue stone, of a statue pointing at nothing and a shadow pointing at truth, of starlings irritated by a pulse only their bones could hear.
You aren't random, she told the presence she refused to call a man. You're ritual. You're trying to teach, which is worse. Her notebook lay open on the desk, the arc between Phoenix and Chicago, a bruise-colored curve. A penciled question mark hovered above a third dot that refused, for now, to choose its city. She wrote in small, neat letters along the curve's edge, You're mapping belief. And then below it, almost gently, I see you. She did not know that elsewhere, a man with a different notebook wrote the same words, in a different hand, for a different reason.
Good evening, Dr. Calder. I prefer correspondence to conversation. Consider this a courtesy. A future city has been eliminated. A different one ascends. Your chalk misleads you only because it is honest. A pause. The sound of a page turning. Do not repeat this to the Bureau. They measure the wrong thing.
Her flip phone lit without ringing. The screen remained blank, no number, no notification. The hair along her arms rose like grass in wind. She sat very still and listened to the room. Then she turned the phone off and took out the battery, because sometimes superstition is just security with a head start. She opened the notebook to a clean page and wrote, "He's reading." Then smaller, "He's writing back."
The second city didn't give her answers, it gave her grammar. And grammar was how you spoke to a mind that believed fear had syntax. Chapter 3, The Philosopher Soldier.
You can count a city by the sounds it forgets. Phoenix forgets wind. Chicago forgets its own river. Washington forgets the space between sentences. He wiped the rifle barrel the way monks once polished bells. Slow, circular, without vanity. The cloth moved like breath. The motion calmed him, not because it was ritual, but because it was proof. The steel reflected back a world clean of fingerprints, including his own. They want motive the way children want stories before sleep. But motive is a function, not a fable. I will say it plainly, if anyone is listening. 1 bullet per city, because truth requires minimum force. He folded the cleaning cloth into quarters and placed it inside a sealable bag. The rifle case shut with a padded domestic click, the sort of sound you'd hear from a good kitchen drawer. He preferred tools that didn't perform for applause. He set the notebook beside the case and drew a line so faint the page barely admitted it, a habit learned in rooms where loudness got men killed. A third city approaches. The curve will hold. She is near it without knowing. A pause, the whisper of paper. Good. A problem worthy of its solver elevates the solver. Let us see if she believes that, or if she insists on mercy.
The Georgetown Library reserved a small, carpeted room for special collections, which in practice meant maps that smelled of attic and books that resisted being opened. Dr. Isla Calder liked the room because it argued with her in a civilized way. The argument of paper and geometry suited her mind's edges. She spread 3 city plans across the table: Phoenix, Chicago, and a Denver she had already forgiven. Black thread connected places where sun and symbol might collaborate for a minute and then move on like dancers exchanging hands. On the legal pad beside the maps, she wrote 4 words. Shape, shadowant, silence, exit. The 4th word had a box round it. Exit wasn't an afterthought for minds like this, it was motive's twin. If fear was the input, vanish was the output. The one-shot doctrine demanded both. She flipped to a fresh page and labeled it instrumentation. Then she listed what her instincts kept circling. Suppressed report, subsonic, tuned, not whisper. Ceramic or composite barrel insert, heat signature minimized. Dissolving bullet or ceramic core, limits recovery. Ultrasonic rangefinder pulse. Starling stutter, humans don't. Remote trigger capability, microdrone or wired actuator as variant. Next to each line, she wrote a margin note in smaller hand. Elegance bias. Don't get seduced. She'd learned in Edinburgh that refined cruelty often masked ordinary laziness. Never attribute genius where habit would do.
She checked the time zones for 3 cities along the curve she'd drawn the night before. Her pencil hovered over Charleston and San Diego, then drifted back toward St. Louis with stubborn curiosity, then forward to Providence and Boston, where morning light behaved like a metronome. She added a small dot near Baltimore, crossed it out, then drew a ghost dot just north of it. She liked ghost dots. They kept her honest. Her flip phone, resurrected with battery reinserted against superstition, stayed unlit. Good, let it sulk. She boxed silence a second time and wrote under it, "What does he refuse to say?"
She allowed 10 graduate students into a closed seminar that afternoon, too few bodies to generate gossip, enough minds to generate friction. On the board she wrote fear T equals F input, medium amplification, and beneath it, smaller, minimum effective dose. What does 1 bullet do that 2 would ruin, she asked. A tall student with a boxer's nose said, "It proves control." A quiet woman said, "It keeps the narrative empty, so we fill it." A man in the back said it lets him leave. Isla nodded. All true. Also, it fixes the signal-to-noise ratio. Panic likes echoes. He knows that, so he refuses the second echo. She drew a little city, childish towers, and a plaza like a Lego square. She drew 1 dot at the plaza's edge. "Watch what 1 dot does," she said, and shook the chalk dust from her fingers as if scattering people. "Now imagine his mind isn't violent first. It's mathematical." "Then what is he proving?" asked the boxer-nosed student. "That fear is the purest lever," she said. that governance hangs from it more than law does, that markets and media will do the amplification for him. And the motive? The quiet woman asked. Isla smiled without softness. He doesn't need one you like, the class wrote as if afraid the chalk would outrun them. Isla returned the chalk to the board's metal trough precisely, then left the room while they were still thinking, because she had learned that thought survives best when you aren't watching it. Her office door was ajar. She hadn't left it that way. She felt the old prickle at the base of her skull. Ancestral, practical, rude. She stepped sideways instead of forward, so that if anyone waited they would meet a shoulder, not a throat. The room was empty, nothing stolen, nothing moved, except the bishop on her desk stood exactly center on a square of blank paper, not where she'd left it. Under its base, a phrase in block letters, "A function can be inverted." She did not touch the bishop. She neither smiled nor swore. She looked at the window, still locked. She looked at the bookcase, spine widths unchanged. She examined the door jamb with a magnifying lens no one knew she carried. A smear of graphite, almost invisible. Someone had gloved hands, but an ordinary pencil to keep the latch from clicking.
"Thank you," she told the air, "for telling me we're colleagues now." She lifted the bishop, read the sentence again, then turned the paper over. Blank. Under the desk lip, taped in the dark, her fingers found a wafer-thin square. A passive RF tag sticker, the kind libraries and retailers used to track books, the kind conference badges used to count bodies passing doors. She peeled it away with care and set it beside the bishop. "Not a bomb, not a mic," she said, almost fond. "A presence counter. You're measuring me." She should have called the FBI. She should have filed a campus report. She brewed tea instead, this time with a vengeance.
She wrote him a note she did not intend to mail. "Dear Inversion, if you can invert a function, can you invert a conscience? Or is yours already solved for zero?" Warmly, and I mean that precisely, "I see." She tore the page into 4 equal squares, put 3 in the bin, and kept one under the bishop like a promise. Then she went hunting, not for him, but for his silences. She combed the live streams again, not for faces or reflections, but for gaps. The split-second compressions where phone microphones auto-gained against a sudden ultrasound pulse. The hitches where a codec's math betrayed an input the human ear missed. On a clip from Chicago, shot vertical, breathless, she found it. A gnat buzz whine 2 octaves above annoyance, there and gone in under 80 milliseconds. The starling's pattern flinched like a crowd ducking a thrown glass. She recorded the timestamp, scrubbed forward to the impact, not on flesh, but on marketing glass. A storefront panel struck just so, the first sound audible to humans being a flex crack after the pulse. He had ranged the distance on the glass, not on the man. The city itself became his ruler. She clapped once quietly in a room no one could see. "Elegant bastard," she said without malice. She kept an odd habit for a woman of systems. She sat in empty churches. Not to pray. Her quarrel with the universe needed neither pew nor chorus, but to listen where echoes had practice. Washington gave her 100 choices. She picked one with stone that cooled thought and a nave that tamed footsteps. She sat halfway down and traced the curve of the vault with her eyes until her breathing matched it. When she was younger, a mentor had accused her of worshipping elegance. She had denied it and proven him right in the same hour. She thought of that now as she pictured a man who could range a city on a pane of promotional glass. "Do you believe anything?" she asked the empty air, and let the question emigrate. Her flip phone vibrated once on the pew beside her. She looked at it like a bee that had wandered indoors. The screen showed no caller ID. She did not answer. The vibration ceased. After a count of 8, a text appeared without a number. "Inversion isn't moral, it's mathematical." You, of all people, understand that. She typed a reply and did not send it. Math without ethics is a child with matches. Instead, she put the phone under her thigh to warm it into compliance and said aloud to the stone, "If you are measuring me, measure this. I am not afraid." The phones of 100 strangers within a mile insisted that was a lie. The stone believed her. She built a counter pattern. If his doctrine was minimal input, maximal fear, hers would be minimal noise, maximal clarity. She listed constraints she'd impose on herself if she were him. No repeatable vantage, no fetish for a weapon, no imprint that could be ritualized by a copycat. He would despise imitation almost as much as sloppiness. That suggested portability over power. Modularity. A rifle that could be parted and rebuilt with interchangeable subassemblies, no single signature enduring across scenes, a suppressor board for multiple barrels. A bolt assembly he could change the way other men changed ties. She sketched a receiver not unlike a dozen off-the-shelf options, then erased the brand name she'd reflexively written. No brands. You hide in generalities. Her inbox pinged. She didn't look. The dean would be extracting promises she wouldn't keep. The FBI would be dressing warnings as invitations. She turned the lamp off and let the dark do what it was invented to do. Make edges honest.
We learned once that control is a lie we tell frightened boys so they walk forward. We learned that an order can be flawless and still arrive at the wrong hour. We learned to write letters afterward that praised the dead for obeying. He rarely permitted memory more than the length of a breath. Tonight he let it have 2. If I am a philosopher, blame the part of me that could not forget the arithmetic of loss. If I am a soldier, blame the part of me that could. Inversion is mercy of a kind. It turns the question around. What is fear for? He closed the notebook and slept a soldier's sleep, flat, unbothered, ready.
At 7:14 a.m., a man in a courier's jacket placed an envelope on Isla's cafe table without meeting her eyes. The motion was rehearsed. He left without coffee. Inside, a single Polaroid. Her office bishop on its little square of paper, captioned in block letters, "You teach with pieces. I teach with boards." She flipped the photo over, blank. She borrowed the barista's pen, just for a second, thanks, and wrote along the white border. The board is the city, but the city moves back. She slid the Polaroid into a library book she returned that afternoon to a drop slot with an indifferent clunk. If he wanted a corridor to walk, she would build one with quiet doors. Special Agent Dillon stared at 2 things that did not belong in the same folder: a transcript of Dr. Calder's lecture and a still frame from a security camera in a corridor outside her office, empty except for a shadow with shoulders wrong for the time code. He dialed her number again and got nothing. He sent an email with a subject line he hoped would pull her gaze: unsolicited campus security tip. He wrote, "Please call me. This is not a consult. This is about your door." He did not add the part about the janitor who swore he'd locked it. He did not add the part about the RF sticker recovered from her bin because a cleaner liked that kind of glue for his grandkid's school project. He did not add his hunch that he was already late to a conversation conducted without him. The third city revealed itself not with a headline, but with a shadow that arrived on her map at precisely the hour she had predicted 3 days earlier if her curve was more language than luck. Providence, a statue's outstretched arm on a hill, a plaza at the base where morning errands braided into a human rope, glass that had not been replaced in a decade, the sort that spoke in low notes when stressed. She circled it and wrote third in small letters that did not congratulate themselves. She booked no ticket, she packed no bag, she waited, because the man measuring her needed to believe she had chosen not to chase. Let him guess which variable she was protecting, the city or herself. Her flip phone vibrated on the desk like a guilt that hadn't earned the name. "You will learn nothing there," the text said. "The lesson is not locational. Calder, not pursuit." She typed and sent this time, then invert. "Prove your doctrine without killing." The pause was long enough for tea to cool. "Mercy isn't data" came back, and data is the only mercy left. She stared at that until the words separated like oil from water and left a slick.
He believes that. That is the part that will get people killed forever, if not stopped now. She wrote across the map, through her own curve, with a stroke that felt like breaking glass. Stopping you is stopping the idea. And then smaller beneath it, show the board to the city. Make the city move first. Car.
That evening, she did what he would least expect. She went public. Not to television, but to a room of policy students and city planners. She presented the doctrine without names. One-shot minimalism, shadow alignment, exit primacy, ultrasonic ranging, glass as ruler. She showed the counter, open geometry, public sightlines, adaptive crowd management, civic rehearsals that don't panic but pivot. Fear wants corridors, she said. Build plazas that don't feed it. Teach commuters to pause and look up, not to play hero, to cut angles that flatten the shot. "A hand, you're training targets." "No," she said, "I'm untraining patterns. You cannot stop every hand. You can starve its mathematics." It wasn't a manifesto. It was a manual. She left copies on a table by the exit, a one-page field card designed like a subway map, instructions in plain verbs, diagrams even a tired body could understand. If he measured amplification, she would see dampers.
She will ruin the experiment with competence. The notebook shut hard enough to startle the dust. Very well, a more difficult proof then. Inversion requires reversing the question, if panic is the force I apply, what is the equal and opposite reaction? Courage, but courage is noisy, easily faked. Find a purer opposition. A memory rose unbidden, a teacher's hand guiding his on a page, letters formed like soldiers on parade. Ask what resists, the hand had written in a margin long gone. Attention, he said aloud, testing the word. Not noise, not bravery. Attention resists panic. He smiled without warmth. Then I will break attention. Not with volume, with elegance.
The message arrived at 4:11 a.m., that hour when mind and body argue about ownership. Your card is pretty. Let's see if it survives contact. She dressed without thinking about clothes and laced boots with the speed of an old habit. She woke no one, not even the cat. She left the bishop on the desk, standing guard over the map like a small, stubborn saint. On the way out, she slid the field card into her pocket, her own version of a talisman, and told herself that talismans are just tools you happen to believe in. Outside, the air felt like a sentence waiting for its verb.
You wanted a dialogue, she said to the empty street. You have one.
Chapter 4, Isla's Obsession.
She rode north to Chicago with 3 tools, a leather notebook, a pocket compass, and a pair of cheap earbuds that lied to her in exactly the same way every time. Consistent liars were useful. She downloaded 24 public live streams of the plaza from the hour before the shot to the hour after, then muted the lot. Sound came later. First came shape. At Union Station, she didn't hail a taxi. She walked the grid like a surveyor, measuring with shin and boot heel. At the plaza, the flowers were new, the chalk messages heartbreaking and unhelpful. She ignored both and mapped edges, curb angles, storefront glass, gutter line. She paced the statue's shadow, checked sun azimuth on a worn printout, then folded the paper back into itself like origami.
Triangle ABC holds. You made the city your instrument. A pigeon pecked her bootlace. She watched its head jerk sink to something the humans couldn't hear. Not random. Rhythm. She took out the earbuds.
On livestream number 11, teen, the waveform blipped above human honesty. An ultrasonic pulse, short enough to be a wink, long enough to seat a range. The starlings flinched. There, the sky folded and reopened like paper handled badly. At 7:21, the storefront flexed and sang an inaudible low note as the pain took the stress plane first. The human body arrived last. She rewound, played it again without sound, then again with only the left channel. The blip stayed. Her earbuds, faithful liars, rendered it as a faint insect sting. Good. She wanted the sting. On the pavement where the red sweater had met the cold blue stone, she kneeled and aligned the city's seams with her own bones.
You ranged on glass, not flesh. Minimal input, maximal fear, and maximal egress. She followed the angles to a rooftop with a fox mural, long faded by sun and committee scolding. The access door's push plate shone with the earnest clean of a recent polish. The latch had graphite on it, a Whisper light smear that would mean nothing to anyone who hadn't had her office door politely invaded the day before. She breathed once, felt anger arrive and take its seat, then leave when it realized it wasn't going to be fed.
On the roof, she let the wind tell her which stories were lies. Little brass flags on HVAC housings squeaked east. A rope coil lay too tidy for union work. Coiled by someone who had been taught to coil rope so it would pay out without snarling. Military tidy, sailor tidy. She photographed nothing. She memorized curves, because curves were harder to subpoena and easier to keep. She lay flat and pressed her ear to the concrete. A trick learned on a winter case in Leith. Concrete remembers tension for a while. When you put your ear to it, your breath decides it has nothing to do with you. In the low frequency, she heard yesterday's city like an after image. She let it pass through. Back at street level, she walked 2 blocks and sat on a church step where the grout had cracked into a tiny delta, 3 tributaries, seeking a river under stone. She sketched the rooftop, the stairwell, the rope, the fox. She wrote in the margin, ceramic insert barrel, heat signature minimized, composite projectile, dissolving binder. Suppressor tuned, subsonic, not whisper, not boom. And under that elegance bias warning, she drew a skull and crossbones to scold herself. She opened a private blog tab and typed, Chaos Diary, Entry 42, Glass as Ruler. The entry was anonymous in the way academic gossip never is. She diagrammed without naming a city, shadow alignment, ultrasonic seating, exit primacy. She wrote, If you must look, look up, not to be a hero, to break the only corridor the shot requires. Then she wrote the line she wished someone had told the plaza before the red sweater met the stone. A city is a lens if you let it be. Dirt the lens. She hovered on publish. Her finger refused romance and pressed. The entry joined 41 others that 3 people read and 1 person she hoped hated. Her flip phone vibrated once on the table, then went docile. She didn't check it. Instead, she emailed a chemist in Glasgow who owed her a favor. Subject: hypothetical soluble composites. If you had a small projectile with a ceramic core and a water solvent reactive binder, and you wanted it to become unrecoverable within hours, what would you choose that wouldn't light a forensic lab on fire? Asking for a paper I'll never write. She closed the lid. She liked questions that did not write checks. Obsession looked good on her when no one watched. She liked to thread across disciplines: bird migration papers, sun table charts, municipal glass replacement schedules dug out of a public procurement portal that no one had passworded properly. She found, without surprise, that the pane the bullet had flexed in Chicago was past due for replacement by 11 months, the budget delayed by a committee that preferred aesthetic to necessity. She wrote in the margin, "Beauty kills if you let accounts oversee physics," then crossed it out as uncharitable and true. The Glasgow chemist wrote back with brevity she adored. From Cole, hypothetical, PLA blend with hygroscopic plasticizer ceramic microcore. Add a soluble salt that recruits moisture, won't disappear, but it will sulk to mush. You're well? See? She wrote sulks to mush and circled it twice.
She is sewing with clever thread. A cursor blinked in a window he should not have been able to open. He did not touch her blog. Vanity was beneath him, but he watched its echo. 3 reposts on minor forums, 1 earnest email from a graduate student to a professor with the subject line, "Is this you?" He wrote in his notebook, countermeasure, attention breakers. Under it, mirrors, water, mismatch rhythms, choreographed distractions. Under that, smaller, Dallas. Then he struck Dallas out and wrote it again. He enjoyed the ritual of false vetoes. If she trains them to look up, he thought, I will give them a sky not to trust.
She went back to Phoenix, not for sentiment but for control. 2 points made a line. You tested a line at both ends. She walked the plaza at the hour the man in blue had fallen, ignoring the memorials that had multiplied into a garden of ache. She stood where the shot would have made sense and then stepped 1 meter left to where it didn't. He had not taken the shot that begged to be taken. He had taken the one that taught. That told her something about his appetite. Not gluttony, not cruelty for its own sake. Instruction. She felt the chill of it along the inside of her left wrist, where bad news liked to live. A city contractor rolled past with a new pane wrapped in blue film, and 2 men bored already with the day. She watched them mount the glass and listened to its complaint as the frame accepted it. The sound was the same genre as a human sob without being a human sob. She apologized to the air for noticing. On the flight back east, she diagrammed intervals. Phoenix, Chicago, 1 day, 8 hours. Chicago, unknown, but his doctrine wanted replication, not escalation. She wrote 1, 2, 3, 5 along the notebook's margin, not because she believed in numerology, but because the Fibonacci tickled the same part of her brain that stalked elegance with a shepherd's crook.
If you're a philosopher soldier, integers are your romance. You'd rather make poets angry than mathematicians bored. She drew boxes around 3 and 5 and wrote beside 3. Third shot, 3 days. Besfourth, 5 days. And under both, beautiful trap. Don't step in it.
She printed a 1-page memo, no header, no signature, and slipped copies under 3 campus doors. Facilities, security, events. The memo did not predict or warn. It instructed. Keep maintenance hatches locked. Audit graphite residue on latches. Canvas rooftops for coil patterns that pay out clean. Photograph. Don't touch. Replace long overdue glass if you cannot brace it to detune resonance. Train staff to pause and look up for 5 seconds at the top of the hour. Ban drones on Central Quad for 1 week. post signs that read Sky Aware. She signed it in pencil on one, "Please don't make a fuss, just be boring in the correct direction." Ptolemy the cat kneaded her cardigan into a cathedra and forgave her for leaving. She forgave herself less quickly. She turned the bishop in her hand until the chip found her thumbprint by habit. The bishop had been a gift from a man who had once told her she loved ideas more than people. She had told him he loved people the way arsonists loved wood. Neither had been wrong. They had married other people. Her flip phone vibrated on the desk with a number she did not know and an urgency she did. She let it go to the place where voicemails fossilize. Then she listened. "Dr. Calder, Dylan again. 2 things. 1, your office was entered. Yes, we know you know. 2, the Bureau wants your notes. I want your time. There's chatter about a 3rd. She hit delete. She would call him when she had facts and not before. Not because she distrusted him, but because she distrusted corridors. She opened the blog and began entry 43, rhythm. Intervals suggest intention. Intention suggests ideology. Ideology suggests predictability, until it is observed, at which point intention inverts. If you want to damp fear, invite attention, train the public in one small, boring act repeated. Boredom is a vaccine. She published, she closed the lid, she stood in the dark, letting her eyes learn it again from scratch.
Her boredom is clever. I prefer clever enemies. He laid out options like knives on a cloth. Dallas, reflections and honest light. Providence, a statue with a finger that points like a schoolmaster. San Diego, water, gulls, and the military's shadow cast long. He rejected Providence on principle. She had circled it already in the mind he borrowed through her writing. He returned to Dallas and drew a line past a mirrored facade that had been a temptation when he'd been weaker. Break attention, he reminded himself. Teach them to distrust what they practice. He added to the kit a microdrone that would be only the trigger, not the hand. He did not like gimmicks. He liked redundancy. The drone would do one thing, close a circuit at a distance while he was elsewhere, already stepping into a lobby 2 blocks away to ask the desk clerk if they had postage stamps, the way ordinary men did. He wrote in the notebook, under countermeasure, Mirror's Law. Then he closed the book. 1 per city, he said softly to the dark, because more would lie.
At breakfast, she spread the U.S. map and drew her curve again, then deliberately drew it wrong, twice, to see how the wrongness felt. 1 wrong curve landed on Dallas not because it fit the geometry, but because it fit him. A place where straight lines got cocky at noon and glass believed its own sales copy. She did not want Dallas. That was reason enough to consider it. Her flip phone vibrated once, this time a text, no number. Coincidence is a sin only to people who don't lift it. Dallas is a coincidence. She replied without ceremony, "Thank you for the map, Nathaniel. I don't need it." The pause tasted like copper, then, "You named me. Don't do that again." Names make people arrogant. She typed and deleted, then sent, "So does power." She powered the phone down and removed the battery. Not superstition. Hygiene. She printed a 2-line brief for Dylan and hand-delivered it to a front desk that would log it and lose it in the same hour. 3rd event likely within 72 hours. City may not fit my curve if he is now optimizing for attention break rather than shadow alignment. Prepare for a shot that uses reflection or water as vector. Do not stage visible SWAT theatrics. Flood rooftops with boring custodians and glaziers. If you must posture, posture with clipboards. She added a postscript the Bureau would ignore. Check bird behavior 10 minutes prior. If starlings misbehave, look up. On her way out, she bought postage stamps from a lobby clerk to see how the gesture felt. It felt like borrowing an alibi from a stranger. At 11:02 a.m., a cable news lower third changed its verbs, not were. Are. Are breaking, Dallas one-shot panic downtown. She didn't turn the sound up. The pictures were noisier in silence. A mirrored facade caught a morning sunbeam like a blade. The crowd's choreography shattered on impact after the glass sang and before the body hit. People ran in right angles. Corridors for fear, perfect and predictable. Her throat closed, opened. She drew Dallas on the map with a dark dot and wrote beside it, small and dispassionate, 3 days, Fibonacci holds, then smaller, he read me, I read him reading me. The feed cut to an overhead shot. A microdrone hung in the corner of the frame, a gnat too dignified to admit itself. It skittered, struck brick, and died like a thought interrupted. She wrote trigger only, hand elsewhere. Under that, he is already gone. Her field card lay on the desk where she'd left it. She put it in her pocket and stood up.
You made the board. He moved a piece. Move back. She called Dylan before he could call her. Providence was a feint, he said, breath thin, somewhere between elevators. You knew. Your note. How did you? I didn't know, Isla said. I measured. Listen to me. Tell your people to stop teaching attention to look where they already look. Tell them to look at the medium, glass, water, mirrors. Put rangers on rooftops with brooms, not rifles. Brooms. Sweep for drones and coil marks. Brooms? Trust me, she said, and for once didn't add the footnote. The line swallowed both of them and went dead.
Inversion complete, he wrote. She trains attention. I break it. She will adapt. Good. He stood in a post office lobby and bought stamps from a clerk who wished him a blessed day. He thanked the man with sincerity, as practiced as prayer. He mailed a single sheet to a university address. No signature, no threat, just a line of math written in a hand precise enough to offend sloppy thinkers. Del the fear in attention. Below it smaller, solve for attention. He left the lobby at a walking man's pace. Somewhere, the drone he had not touched fell out of a frame. Somewhere else, a woman who liked bishops and chalk turned down a hallway and chose a staircase that would not get her killed today.
The envelope reached her that night like a teacher reaching the end of an equation he knew she'd finish without him. She read the line and did not smile. She wrote beneath it with a pen whose nib had cleaned itself 1,000 times. K is not a constant if we make it so. She pinned the paper to the map with the bishop and poured a measure of whiskey she did not drink. Then she wrote Chapter 5 on a new page and underlined it once, the third shot.
He fired 3 bullets. She built 3 sentences. The city learned 1 new verb, look. Chapter 5, the third shot.
Sunlight arrived in Providence like an apology, soft, diluted through Atlantic mist. For most, it was an ordinary Thursday. For Dr. Isla Calder, it was a variable coming due. She had been wrong before and forgiven herself efficiently. This morning, she expected no such mercy. She stood on a pedestrian bridge above the river, notebook open against the railing, pencil poised like a divining rod. Her handwriting didn't look like anyone's. Letters tilting at mathematical degrees, loops barely closing, as if afraid of being misread by machines.
He's overdue by 9 hours. That isn't hesitation. That's choreography. Dr. Calder? We've got chatter on the Dallas footage. Ceramic residue confirmed. Drone fragments recovered. Your range pulse theory checks out. I'm sure your director is thrilled. I'm calling because you mentioned a third. Where? Providence, 41 Dorate N, 71 GRU 25W. A plaza with a bronze angel pointing east. If he's consistent, the shot will use reflection again, not shadow. You sound certain. Certain is a luxury, I'm disciplined. The call clicked dead before the apology could arrive.
She walked the plaza perimeter, each shoe tap measuring more than distance. The bronze angel's arm caught the early light. Its shadow stretched across the cobbles toward the river's mirrored face. Tourists fed pigeons. Commuters ignored the pigeons. The ordinary, his favorite camouflage. At 7:19 a.m., she noticed the flock hesitate, not scatter, hesitate. A pause carved into motion, the same micro-silence she'd heard in Phoenix and Chicago on a waveform that lived in her nightmares.
Pulse just fired. She turned slowly, scanning facades. The sound of an engine idling on the adjacent street. A white van with contractor decals too new to be weathered. On its roof, a small device, harmless-looking like a vent. Her pen fell from her fingers.
The bullet entered through a window reflection, a perfect mirror shot, catching a woman across the plaza mid-stride. The sound that followed was not a scream, but an algorithm, panic cascading through predictable vectors. She counted 5 seconds before the sirens began. He'd timed it to traffic light change, the fleeing would bottleneck. Efficiency disguised as chaos. She pressed herself against a pillar, heart iron fast, then stepped out, forcing her gaze where others wouldn't. The van door was open, empty, driver's seat pristine, no prints, no residue, a folded newspaper on the dash, headline, Chaos Expert Calls Fear a Function. Her own words reprinted from the Georgetown lecture. He wasn't mocking her, he was citing her.
Replication completed. Variable introduced. Attention of subject. Observation. She arrives on time, unarmed, unafraid, statistically predictable. Hypothesis. Proximity increases clarity. Remove anonymity.
Dylan's unmarked sedan skidded into the cordon 10 minutes later. He found her standing alone, coat soaked, notebook closed. Jesus called her, you shouldn't be here. I'm exactly where he wanted me, she said, but so are you. Don't move the van. He blinked. Bomb, a message. She led him to the open driver's door. On the passenger seat lay a single Polaroid, her office, her bishop, the note she'd kept under it. Across the image, written in marker, every equation needs a variable. Thank you. Dylan swore under his breath. He's inside your campus? Or I'm inside his experiment, she said. She flipped through mental indexes. 3 attacks, 3 geometries. Phoenix, Chicago, Dallas, each defining an axis. Providence created a plane. A 4th would define a volume. That was the progression. He wasn't mapping latitude and longitude. He was drawing space, a 3-dimensional field of fear that behaved like sculpture.
He's building a lattice. When it closes, the pattern stops needing him. She closed the notebook. Agent Dylan, she said softly, he's designing something self-sustaining. Meaning that panic will reproduce itself without another bullet. Viral architecture. He stared at her, not following yet, and she envied him.
By evening, Providence was locked down. Cable anchors narrated chaos as entertainment. She watched from a motel room with curtains drawn, television on mute, volume alive only in captions. The FBI framed it as another lone wolf act of terror. That suited him perfectly. He wanted the phrase to metastasize. She scribbled across the motel notepad. He's done shooting. Next phase is observation. Then below it, observation needs witness. Her own reflection in the dark window answered the rest.
4 cities suffice. The equation will now solve itself. Let them chase motive, I chase propagation. She will understand before the others. That is the mercy. He shut the notebook, slid it into a case the color of old rain, and walked toward the train platform. On the next bench sat a woman reading a tabloid. Headline, Fear Expert Saves None. He smiled, not at cruelty, but at accuracy.
Sleep refused her politely. She lined up the 4 dots on a torn map, Phoenix, Chicago, Dallas, Providence. Drew string through them. The string bowed, not a curve, but a helix, a spiral that would, if extended, intersect somewhere over the Atlantic. She whispered to the map, You're taking the equation off the continent. Her pulse slowed, then steadied. She circled a single word, Boston, and under it, or sea. Lightning made the glass blink white, and for an instant her reflection became someone else's face, a trick of light or a warning. She wrote on the final line of her notebook page, The board is expanding, and I'm already standing on it.
The 3rd shot finished the pattern. The 4th, she knew, would begin the game. Chapter 6, the chessboard.
By noon, the Providence Plaza looked like a crime scene rehearsing for television. Blue tape, yellow vests, cameras pretending they weren't watching. Dr. Isla Calder stood just beyond the cordon, soaked, uninvited, angry at geometry. Dylan found her first. You're supposed to be in D.C., not in my disaster movie. Your disaster movie is my classroom. He handed her a coffee gone cold. We've traced the van, stolen plates, clean engine bay. We pulled a fingerprint, but it's yours, from Dallas. You're getting predictable. Then he planted it. He wants a narrative. Maybe he wants an audience, Dylan said. Maybe you're the headline. She didn't answer. She was watching the windows, every pane still intact, yet all of them watching back. At FBI headquarters that afternoon, she commandeered a conference wall and turned it into a map of intent. Red string was cliché, so she used chalk tape, peelable, neat. Phoenix, Chicago, Dallas, Providence, each connected by a curve that twisted like DNA. He's not moving along the map, he's moving through time. Each location corresponds to a moment when population density and information traffic intersect. He's orchestrating panic as a broadcast medium. Meaning the next event will be less about the bullet and more about the reaction. He doesn't need to shoot again, he just needs people to expect it. A young analyst looked up from his tablet. So he's weaponized anticipation? She nodded once. Exactly, fear that maintains itself. She fed the Bureau's data into her own algorithm, crowd sentiment heat mapping, a model she'd written in Edinburgh to study riot escalation. The output made Dylan whistle low, a pulsing wavefront of panic probability radiating northeast toward Boston. He's pulling the spiral tighter. Boston's the natural next node. We'll lock it down. No, she said. You'll crowd it with uniforms and make him happy. He feeds on symmetry. We break the symmetry. Up. By dusk, she was on a train to Boston, laptop balanced on her knees, phone muted. The carriage lights reflected her face in triplicate across the window, a surveillance hall of mirrors. She stared at her own eyes and spoke to the reflection.
You wanted acceleration. Here it comes. The train lurched, signal dropped, the compartment dimmed. When lights returned, an envelope sat on the seat beside her. Plain white, her name printed by hand, Calder. She opened it. Inside, a chess diagram printed from a newspaper. Endgame, black to move, the white king cornered, the black bishop poised. A note beneath it in fine graphite. Check does not mean loss. It means attention. Her pulse ticked once. She pocketed it, finished her coffee cold, and didn't bother changing seats.
Boston met her with a scent of wet brick and electricity. The plaza she'd circled on her map was under renovation. Half scaffold, half glass, perfect acoustics for terror. She walked the perimeter, counting cameras, angles, reflections, and then she saw it, a man on the opposite rooftop, still as math. A silhouette cap case calm, her throat tightened, but she forced herself to keep walking. If he wanted the reaction, she wouldn't gift it. She ducked into a service stairwell and climbed 3, 4, 5 floors, emerging onto her own rooftop across the divide.
She raised binoculars. The silhouette hadn't moved. Then it did, slowly turning the rifle toward her. No panic. She stepped sideways behind a vent, heartbeat smooth. The shot never came. Instead, her phone buzzed once. Text, inversion, you're on the board now. Move.
Seconds later, 2 blocks away, a shot, one only, echoed across the Charles. A crowd convulsed, car horns joined, a drone of panic climbed. She lowered the binoculars. The rooftop opposite was empty. She uttered.
Isla, we've got another. South Station Plaza. One down, no shooter. Where the hell are you? 2 streets north. He fired while I watched him not fire. That's the inversion. He's split presence. Split what? He's remote triggering decoys while physically watching me. He's turned the experiment into correspondence. She ducked into an alley. Rain ricocheted off dumpsters. Her pulse found its metronome. She remembered his last text, move.
She found the vantage point by instinct, not reason. A derelict clock tower overlooking both plazas, the perfect observer's perch. Inside, dust and brass and a faint metallic odor, gun oil too recent to belong to ghosts. She ascended the spiral stair. Halfway up, her phone vibrated again. Every observer becomes subject. Turn around. She did.
He was there, 10 meters below, stepping into the light shaft, coat dark, face calm, rifle slung but not aimed. He looked nothing like a monster, everything like a teacher, satisfied with a pupil's progress.
Dr. Calder, he said, his voice even through the hollow stare. You've done beautifully. I needed an intellect that could see the lattice. You don't need intellect. You need oxygen. Stop breathing, and it ends. He smiled, faint. Still witty under observation. Good. I feared the Bureau would flatten you into jargon. What's the next node, Cross? You think the next city matters? We're past that. The pattern is self-replicating. People are making their own noise now. The gun is retired. Then why are you here? Cross, to watch the moment you realize that stopping me achieves nothing. To measure what you do when purpose collapses. He raised a small device, no trigger, just a lens, and pressed it. A flash, not light but soundless, rippled the air. Her phone lit with an incoming stream. Live feeds, hundreds, each showing her face in real time, captured from every surveillance camera she'd walked past in 3 cities. He's built a live pattern out of me.
The tower lights flickered. The old clock gears shuddered awake for the first time in decades. Cross turned to leave. You'll never make it down that stair. He glanced back, serene. You'll stop me? No, she said. Gravity will. She kicked the lever that released the maintenance weight. The counterweight dropped, a roar of old iron. Cross leapt sideways. The chain sliced his coat and bit into the stair rail, metal shrieking. When the dust cleared, nothing. The lower door banged in the wind. She descended, one slow turn at a time, phone still filming without her consent. By the time she reached street level, the live feeds had cut to black. She looked up. The clock's hands had stopped at 12:47, the exact minute of every previous attack.
He synchronized the lattice through me. Every camera in America just learned that number. She exhaled once, spoke aloud, steady as a vow. This isn't over. The function can invert again.
The hunter had finally looked down the barrel and found herself. And somewhere unseen, the philosopher soldier smiled because checkmate was never the point. Attention was, Chapter 7, lines in the...
The city had not yet learned to breathe again. After the clock tower clash, Boston's arteries pumped with adrenaline like a drug. News vans growled down cobbled streets. Citizens, newly schooled in the syllable one-shot, kept their heads low or strangely high, as if trying to see through the world's obvious lies. Dr. Isla Calder ran a different current. She moved laterally, not straight at a threat. If Cross wanted a risk that read like ritual, she would give him a geometry he couldn't expect.
She ducked into a subway platform and became careful where her feet had been careless moments before. She swapped jackets with a commuter who complained politely about the rain and the inconvenience of fear. She paid for her ticket with hands that didn't tremble. Isla, where are you? We lost the feed from the tower. He's vanished. Cameras have a gap on that block. Isla. I'm fine. Not safe. I'm not a signal. Do not make me a rally. She mouthed to a kid with too many earbuds. Keep the red line clear. And the kid gave her a look that said, Who are you? She gave nothing back but a small nod. Customs is a kindness in little things.
She emerged hours later in a neighborhood that read like a memory of Cambridge. Books everywhere, people with faces like sentences. She rented a small room by the hour in an antiquarian shop whose owner preferred barter to receipts. The shop smelled of glue and fiction and things that survived being loved. She plugged a laptop into the shop's power behind a tower of coffee table books and opened a network that looked anonymous only to those who trusted a single checkbox. For a man who taught with violence, Cross still liked to leave notes. He had written on the negative space of their skirmish. He enjoyed being seen by the eyes that feared. She parsed the stream from the clock tower feeds the Bureau had handed over in a tidy packet, broken frames, that strange tonal index, and one video that had not been broadcast, an overhead of a freight yard outside the city that showed a single man moving like a chess piece at 2:13 a.m. He carried nothing but a shoulder bag.
One man, one bag, one trail. She fed the frames into an object trace model and let algebra do the rest. The bag's manufacturer left a faint pattern on the cargo it touched. That pattern matched a shipment traceable to a small defense supplier in Fargo, a name she'd seen in the footnotes of old military procurement PDFs. She chewed on the possibility. A direct manufacturer tie would be too neat. It would also be an opening. You're running inventory? I'm tracing supply chains, which is less glamorous than phones, but truer. You'll need protection. Isla, you'll need restraint. Please don't posture at my door with SWAT and mics. A pause. Somewhere in that silence, compromise formed its outline. Okay, silent tale. 2 men, no uniforms. We make them look like thoughtful librarians. Good, librarians are boring and patient. He laughed once, like a man who'd nearly forgotten how. All right, I'll hand that to the boring men.
It was a courier with a different kind of parcel. A wine bottle crate with a poisoned label. On top, a Polaroid of the clock tower with a new note scrawled across the white margin. Note, you move beautifully. Let us make sure you move last. Under it, in a different ink, the faint impression of letters as if stenciled. Fargo. She did not jump. She did not break the crate. She thumbed open a small ledger and wrote, as one does when one is planting a seed that will need roots, Fargo Supplier Lead. She made her pen strokes slow so it would be legible later in a different light. Fargo yielded a number of small contractors that smelled of government seals and low budgets. She followed the trail like a child following ribbon in a dark room. The defense firm's CEO had an old Army records number that mapped to a place in Virginia where snipers were taught to think like architects. A pattern thickened. Military procurement, hardened skill sets, men with patience. She texted Cross a single line, not as bait but as calibration. You like craft, so do I. Shall we meet in craft? It was cruel and not entirely civil. She hit send and then forced herself to wait. His response arrived like a scalpel. No, you are not my craft. Then, beneath it, a line so small she almost missed it. Virginia is a good place to learn precision. Fargo is a good place to buy it. She stared at the text long enough that her coffee cooled to bitterness at the edge. The net was woven thicker. She could chase the supply chain and sit on a lead that promised the thrill of proof, or she could step into the less literal game he had offered. Cross wanted response curves. She wanted to flatten them, so she did what she always did. She made an argument and left it in public. She published a piece on her blog, the one with 3 readers and 1 obedient bot, under a pseudonym. The headline was almost nothing: When a City Becomes a Ruler. In it, she offered a bland municipal policy aimed at dampening acoustic triggers, encouraging the immediate replacement of old commercial glass, and training public transit workers to act as human dampers. 2 things happened at once. City councils picked it up for its practical tone. The right kind of readers smelled a provocation. The piece spread at a pace that was not natural. She watched the share rate curve like a living thing. Cross read it. She knew he would. She also knew what he would think. Aha! She germs the public with remedy. Perfect. That made him happy.
She vaccinates the public. Clever. She does not know what a vaccine feels like from the inside. Her remedy flattens my signal. Good, but a vaccine invites boosters. I will administer a booster.
He did not reply to her public bait. Instead, he sent an encrypted packet, a short video, raw and unedited. It showed a long corridor lined with file cabinets. The camera moved unsteady until it stopped at a single file whose tab read Cross N. The film ended with a slow zoom on a date stamp. 1999. Isla stared until the numbers rearranged into memory. 1999 was a year she knew from reports: a bungled overseas training exercise, a reprimand, a name buried in a footnote. She fed the clip to Dylan. The bureau lit up like someone had poured gasoline on a promise. "This is a trace, Isla. We can use it." Or he gave us the needle and told us to find the vein, which is a courtesy I don't need. He was silent. Then what? Then we make him prove it without bullets, she said. We make him prove it with cameras. Dylan arranged a pattern of surveillance that masqueraded as incompetence and then proved itself very competent. Plainclothes men took positions with tchotchkes and clipboards. Streets were not flooded with armor, but with curators, people whose job title was boring and whose gaze was sharp. They were librarians, baristas, tram operators, small nodes ready to record anomalies without performing for them. They set a decoy, a public sculpture installed in a plaza with glass panels intentionally detuned, laminated, braced, and awkward. A single camera looped above it, the footage visible to 6 eyes. The message was clear to anyone with math: make the city a poor ruler. Make the glass a liability. She slept 4 hours under the shop's roof that night, the book pages arranged like a small fort. When she woke, the system had already begun to move. Cross's note arrived as if slid under a door. Short, clean. "You make the field messy," it read. "Fine, I will make the subject clean. Below a time and a place, 14 Harbor Walk." Isla read it once, twice. Her first instinct was to tell Dylan, to light the sky with alarms and protocols and all the tools of a machine that loved its own noise. But she had learned something in the clock tower. Cross loved noise where it served him, and silence where it didn't. He wanted a performance. He wanted a reaction. He wanted one that would be hers. She packed a small bag, notebook, bishop, a printed copy of the Fargo file, and a little recorder that grandfathered her into history. She left the antiquarian shop thinking about chess and how sometimes the best move is to refuse a piece.
She arrived early. Cross was waiting. Not a silhouette here, but a man with an unread face, leaning on the low wall by the river. No rifle, no bag, just a small paperback, the kind you buy in airports and never admit to reading. He looked up as she approached, as if he had been expecting her all along. "Cross, you took my gift. Now you have returned one of your own." "You mean the post you wrote about municipal glass?" He smiled. It made me tidy. She sat 2 paces away and watched him like someone reading a poem aloud. She had rehearsed 100 speeches here, all of them either too noble or too petty. She chose none. "You want a proof. Cross, I want a witness, a mind who will not be distracted by slogans. And if I refuse, Cross, you understand the equation now. You will be tempted to cure it, and the lattice will adapt. Ignore it, and the lattice will adapt anyway. There is no refusal, Dr. Calder, only choice of form."
He reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. No photograph this time. A single photocopied page, A court-martial notice from 1999 with a name that matched the file tab, Nathaniel Cross. The charges were procedural. Excessive force, unauthorized operation. The sentence had been quietly reduced. The report included one line Isla read like a bone. Subject exhibited an unusual belief in instructional pain. Cross watched her face the way a man watches rainfall. Cross soft, almost intimate. You have made a vaccine that makes people look up. It is clever. But a vaccine births immunes. They need boosters. He rose as if to leave. She called after him. Why one? Why not more? He turned. His profile was calm and tired like an old instrument. Cross, one is enough to teach. More is arrogance. Besides, numbers bore me. Elegance does not need repetition. He walked away without the rifle. No flourish, no chase, just the slow, ordinary step of a man who knows how to vanish. She watched him go until the bend in the walk hid him. Then she turned the photocopy over and found on the blank back a name she hadn't expected. A small town in Scotland where she used to lecture as a visiting scholar. A university email address once belonged there, one she had used years ago to request a small loan of a composite sample. The map was finally beginning to fold on itself.
He had brought the past into her present, and when the past finds you, it asks for a reckoning you never knew you owed. Chapter 8, The Trap.
The Atlantic was a blackboard wiped clean. Dr. Isla Calder watched the dark from 14A and tried not to diagram it. Boston fell behind. Scotland waited ahead, not as sanctuary but as source. On her tray lay a photocopy from 1999, Cross's reduced court-martial, and a scribbled line of her own. Instructional pain. Under it, a town name she hadn't spoken in years, Kirkhallow, a commuter village an hour from Edinburgh where she'd once borrowed composite samples from a university satellite lab above a bakery. She closed her eyes and let the plane draw a straight line no one on land would dare. If he had left her that Scottish breadcrumb, it was because he wanted her in origin soil. Traps liked home ground. Dylan met her at the curb with jet-lagged eyes and a coat that didn't belong to the weather. Interagency diplomacy is a polite word for chaos. You've got a Scottish police service liaison. He says he's a fan. I don't need fans. I need doors that open. Good news then, he has keys. Inspector Mary Domnall arrived a minute later, compact, unsentimental, the kind of woman who could fold you into kindness or arrest you with the same hands. Dr. Calder, we've a kettle. We've also a warrant. You tell me which you want first. I was raised right. Kettle, then the warrant. In that order, the world makes sense. Kirkhallow was a memory that had decided to stay useful. A high street with a post office that still sold twine, a bakery that survived on butter and gossip, and above it all, a low-slung materials lab rented by the university for projects too messy for the city. Isla remembered the smell, resin and coffee and wet wool. She'd come here in 2017 for a lecture series on minimal input interventions, how the smallest change in a system could cascade into social behavior. The phrase now tasted like a dare left on a windowsill. Mary, your lab man's name is Alistair Reed, retired early, keeps everything. We like him for that and despite it. They climbed a narrow stair that had never liked feet and found Reed as promised. Wild eyebrows, cardigan older than most crimes, hands that spoke fluent archive. Calder, the one with the chalk. We've still pencil ghosts on the blackboard. He waved them in with a generosity that made the room bigger. They spread boxes across a bench, procurement forms, visitor logs, borrow-out ledgers with margins that had become diaries. Isla ran a finger down the 2017 column until a name caught like a burr. Crosswell visitor U.S. passport, purpose, public safety instrumentation workshop. Contact email, a dead domain ending mill that pretended to be civilian. Crosswell. He loves aliases that only move a letter. Men often do. Reed produced a guest book for that week. The ink had faded to the color of old tea. Isla's name sat 3 lines above Crosswell. A note beside hers read, "Talk, minimum effective dose." The words felt like weather creeping back into a room, something she knew and didn't trust. He sat at the back, that Crosswell, wrote like he was paying a debt, asked clever, unpleasant questions, the sort I remember. What sort? The sort that make mercy look inefficient. The lab's computer betrayed its age with dignity and then surrendered a CCTV directory from a camera pointed at the stairwell. Timestamp stills blinked past. Students, courier, a cat that had adopted the lab. Then, March 14th, 2017, a frame that tightened Isla's throat. She descended the stair mid-laugh with a paper cup. 2 steps below her, a man looked up. Cap, beard close, eyes bright and unstartled. He wasn't handsome. He was awake. That him? Less question, more answer. Mary enlarged the still. The man's left shoulder carried a small scuff on his jacket, a diagonal nick like a habitual scrape against a case. She'd seen that scrape on his coat in Boston when the clock weight had kissed metal. We can work that image, build a lawful line from here to your man, but it'll take bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is a kind of weather. Pack a coat. Reed cleared his throat, guilty and proud at once. There's one more thing. From a thin box he drew a demo kit, a handheld ultrasonic rangefinder prototype, early and elegant. The label read KHL-UR1. A sign-out slip was taped to it, yellowed and meticulous. Borrowed by N. Croswell. A. Reed. Returned no record. Before you say it, yes, my fault. We were trusting. You were generous, that's a separate sin. She photographed the slip, the device mount, the serial sticker curling at one corner, the number UR178. I'll push this through Interpol. If that serial shows up in any downstream kit, we get a tremor. He's been building since before Phoenix, and he built with a piece I lent a room to. She didn't let the guilt take a chair. It could stand. They took a table no one wanted and let the day settle around soup. Mary drew a map on a napkin. Kirkhallow to Edinburgh, to a former military range near North Berwick, where the lab had once tested acoustic detuners against wind and salt. If he was here to learn, he'd have gone there to listen. You think he's still in country? I think men who leave breadcrumbs near bakeries sometimes fancy a roll. Isla's phone buzzed once, the way it did when the sender wanted to be elegant. A message with no number, just coordinates and a sentence. If you want origin, bring your chalk. Dusk, listen to the sea. Just tisde. It's a trap. So's a classroom, depends who holds the chalk. We'll ring the place with quiet, no guns visible, no heroics. Promise me boring. Mary held up a hand like an oath. Boring till it breaks. The range was a ribbon of concrete pads and rusted targets facing the North Sea, the kind of place weather remembers by name. Dusk arrived early, with the gray of a coin worn smooth. They parked out of sight. Plainclothes threaded themselves into gorse and shadow. Dylan checked his watch, then didn't, then did again. Mary murmured into a cuff mic as if telling a story to a child who needed to sleep. Isla walked onto the pad with a stick of chalk she had taken from a classroom, because rituals don't ask permission. She drew a simple line across the concrete, perpendicular to the wind, then a second that intersected at 47 degrees. 47. Because I want him to think I'm thinking like him. She placed the bishop on the intersection. It looked humble, absurd, and exactly right. Footsteps didn't announce him. Silence did, coming from the western edge where the dunes broke wind into logic. He was a darker smear against the darker evening, unarmed to the eye, unthreatening in the manner of a well-behaved storm. Cross, you brought the chalk. You brought the wind. He stepped closer, handing her something small without touching her skin, a USB drive wrapped in waxed paper. Cross, origin as promised, not leverage, context. Strings? None you will see today. Hold. Isla took the drive. It weighed almost nothing. Her hand took it as if it were heavier. Cross. I watched your 2017 talk, minimum effective dose. It was beautiful. I thought this is what mercy might look like if you removed vanity. You removed people instead. I removed excess. The system is crueler than any hand. I chose a cleaner instrument. The sea chose that moment to slap the concrete with a cold palm. You said the gun is retired. It is. The pattern breathes on its own now. Then why are you still here? Cross, because you are. Because the function inverted again. Attention has become the scarce resource. I wanted to see how you'd spend it. He nodded at the bishop. Nice parish. Pat, something shifted where Myrie's people lay. Not a gun, not a charge. just the inevitable tell of human muscles deciding to be useful. Cross heard it, not with ears, but with a soldier's skin. Quiet, almost fond. Boring till it breaks. He stepped backward, not fast. The dusk accepted him. Nathaniel, he paused. Turn yourself into the idea instead. Publish your math. Stand in the light and argue. If you want a witness, make the world the witness and stop treating it like a lens. A beat, a gull's line of complaint. Do you believe arguments still win? I cultivate that delusion. It keeps me from burning libraries. He considered, head tipped, as if a chord had almost resolved. Cross, the drive will tell you more than I can say without lying. Read it, then choose a verb. He melted back into the gorse, footsteps writing nothing the wind would keep. Negative on intercept, he's ghosted. Jesus. No, just a man with tidy excuses. They read the drive in the car with the interior lights low. Folders nested like Russian dolls. 1999 after-action reports, training syllabi, a procurement paper for KHLUR1, Reed's rangefinder stamped demo loan, and a video. Isla clicked play. The image, a classroom in 2017. Her chalkboard, her hand, her voice explaining how one lane closed on a motorway could halt traffic from 3 towns away, minimum effective dose, and how one rumor could turn streets into corrugations of fear. Questions followed. A man off camera asked, if the goal were to minimize casualties while maximizing compliance, what would the dose be? Her voice, younger and certain, one, always one, more than one is gluttony, it teaches the wrong thing. Dylan looked at her without accusation. Mary didn't look at all. She tightened her jaw until it whitened. He brought me my own ghost. The video cut to a military lecture from 1999. A training officer intoning about psychological operations, a slide reading attention as a finite resource, then a footnote, case study removed. He was a student of this before you gave him a prettier sentence. He wanted me to think I made him. I didn't. She closed the laptop and saw her reflection in the dead screen, tired, older than morning, angrier than she preferred. They drove in companionable silence back toward Kirkhallow. The range receded into weather. The bishop sat on the dashboard like an old god who'd retired to traffic. You'll want to blame yourself. Don't. He'd have found a tongue to speak his math in, with or without your chalk. I'm not blaming, I'm choosing my verb. And what is it? She watched the wipers clear more than water. Publish. Publish what? The antidote. His math, my counterfunction, the manual you and I wrote by accident. We lay it open. How he ranged on glass, how he borrowed birds to find distance, how to detune a city without turning it into a bunker. We inoculate attention with practice. He'll hate the light. He invited it, that's the trap he built for himself. Back in the lab, Reed made tea because men like him always knew what to do with evenings. Isla drafted the first paragraphs of a white paper with a title that refused drama. Damping Fear, Practical Measures for Open Cities. She wrote like a surgeon, stitching neat and unsentimental, calling things by their plain names. Her phone vibrated once, no number, a single line. Check does not mean loss. Tension does not mean obedience. She replied with nothing. Not because she had no words, because she had work. She pinned the bishop to the corner of the corkboard with a map tack. Let it watch the room, and kept writing until the words were tired enough to stop arguing.
The trap had teeth on both sides. She would spring it by making it visible, and then she would choose a different verb. Chapter 9, The Leak.
By morning, the paper had left her hands and grown teeth. Damping Fear, Practical Measures for Open Cities. A modest title, an immodest ripple. Within 6 hours, public sector inboxes from Washington to Westminster had jammed under urgent review flags. By noon, her inbox held 2 invitations, 1 threat and a subpoena that hadn't yet decided which it was. Isla sat in a borrowed office on George Street, rain streaking the glass, her laptop alive with the ugly glow of attention. Congratulations, Professor, you've invented panic control. Only as a vaccine. They're turning it into a tranquilizer. He sighed. Half of Homeland wants to deploy your model as crowd behavior mitigation. That's not what you wrote, but they'll quote you anyway. They always do. It's the modern form of translation. She slipped into a cafe to escape the noise of virtue. The radio followed her. Dr. Isla Calder, the Edinburgh academic whose controversial report on psychological stability during terror incidents, she switched it off. The barista recognized her. That was new. "You're her, right? The Calm Cities lady?" "Not calm." He nodded as if that was the same thing.
It's out of our hands. Someone leaked your unredacted field data, the Phoenix and Chicago simulations. They're saying you worked with Cross. Absurd sticks if it scares. The leak came through an encrypted bureau relay, internal, not him, us.
The phrase tasted like metal, not him, us. So he doesn't have to hack us. We're helping. I'm pulling logs. Whoever did it scrubbed metadata with bureau-grade tools. This isn't cross-freelancing. This is someone upstairs. She looked out the window. Across the street, a man in a blue coat pretended to read a newspaper, page unmoving in the wind. I think I'm being cited in real time. Dylan's sedan smelled of coffee and bureaucracy. He passed her a tablet showing a headline already snowballing. Calder's Equation, the Science of Control. Below it, a cropped photo of her with Cross in the 2017 lab footage, his face blurred, hers crisp. They're building the myth you two co-authored reality. Then we edit the story. Truth is an iterative process. You sound calm. I'm furious, it just manifests better. They pushed into the Bureau's temporary Edinburgh annex where security glass and modern art tried to coexist. A senior liaison waited, Deputy Director Holt, imported from D.C., suit perfect, conscience possibly rented. Holt, Dr. Calder, you've done the world a service. We're formalizing your model into the Department of Urban Resilience framework. Resilience isn't obedience. It's semantics, Doctor. It's civilization. Dylan shifted beside her, reading the undertow. Director, that model was for deterrence, not control. Holt, control is deterrence, Agent. The conversation ended not with a word, but a smile that implied ownership. Outside, Isla's hands shook for the first time. She steadied them on the stone balustrade. They don't need Cross. They've internalized him. She opened her phone. A single message waited in her encrypted folder. Welcome to the Lattice, Professor. It learns fast. No signature, no trace. The timing perfect, within seconds of her leaving Holt's office. Either he's in their system or they're quoting him. Both can be true. She began pulling the digital thread. The leaked files bore watermarks from a bureau account she didn't recognize, J. Holt OPS SecComp. She smiled without humor. He leaked me to validate himself. Elegant, in a bureaucratic way. She packaged everything, emails, logs, camera feeds, onto a drive, the same wax paper wrap Cross had used. Symbolic symmetry wasn't lost on her. She typed one final message to Dylan. Trust few. If I go silent, assume they've inverted the function, the cure becomes the control. She placed the bishop into a coat pocket and looked around the room, memorizing the angles. Then she stepped out into the rain. She left Edinburgh behind, taking only notebooks and a name, Holt. Somewhere in D.C., a man was about to learn that the lattice he thought he commanded had already decided which nodes were expendable. She watched her reflection in the dark window until it stopped resembling her. Then she whispered,
If he wants to measure attention, let's see how he handles silence. Ghost logic.
Somewhere between Newcastle and London, Dr. Isla Calder became someone else. She used a discarded ticket, a borrowed coat, and the kind of posture that tells the world you have somewhere dull to be. Names, she decided, were privileges, so for now she would have none. Her laptop was gone. Data lived inside a single microcard hidden behind a postage stamp on a letter addressed to the Scotsman that would never be mailed. Information like faith traveled best as rumor. London was busy rehearsing the future again, billboards shouting, "Resilience is security," a slogan she recognized as her own theory, rewritten by strangers. The Bureau had moved fast. Her paper had become policy, her equations law. She slipped through crowds like a bad conscience, boarded the Northern Line, and surfaced at King's Cross, not because of destiny, but because all crossroads are honest. At a phone booth that had forgotten how to dial, she left a chalk mark shaped like an unfinished equation. Within an hour, someone would see it who owed her a favor. The favor arrived as Elliot Shaw, a retired signals officer who now mended antique radios for people who liked static. He greeted her with understatement. "Elliot, you look like a rumor that's learned to walk. And you still collect them." "Same as always. Tea?" He poured 2 mugs that tasted of metal and nostalgia. "They've turned your lattice into a procurement line. Contracts everywhere, resilience framework, predictive crowd management, God knows what acronyms. Half the funding runs through Shellcore in Luxembourg. Following the money won't stop the math, they've cloned it. Then we make the clones fight each other." He handed her a battered pager, military surplus. "Encrypted via carrier tone, ugly but private. You key in coordinates, I broadcast noise. Every listener chokes on static." She pocketed it. Old ghosts, new tricks. They met again beneath the iron bridge, where graffiti became manifesto. Elliot unfolded a printout, no email trail, showing a chain of signatures. At the top, Deputy Director Holt. Below, something stranger. Cross Systems Limited, newly incorporated, registered agent N. Crosswell. He's alive, or they've resurrected him as a company. Either way, he's billing the government. She traced the letterhead with her thumb. They've monetized fear. Elliot, of course, it scales better than hope. She planned without writing. Maps in memory, schedules disguised as poetry. The objective was no longer capture. It was exposure. If she could leak the procurement chain, show that the same hands funding resilience also owned cross systems, the lattice would collapse under the weight of its own hypocrisy. She called Dylan once, voice low, static thick. "I'm out. Don't chase me. Trust me to do the thing you can't sign for." "You're in their crosshairs already. Then at least let me choose the angle." She hung up before friendship could argue. In a derelict printworks near Battersea, she built her new publication. Not a paper, a manifest, fragments of code, procurement trails, ethics notes, everything she'd never meant the world to see. Each paragraph ended with a question instead of a period. Questions, she decided, were harder to weaponize. At dawn, she pushed it through Elliot's pager rig, modem shriek, carrier hiss, into the gray web of civil service intranets, where boredom itself was a transmission medium. When the city woke, the headlines hadn't caught up yet, but somewhere in 6 ministries, printers spat pages titled, "The Lattice Directive, Author Unknown." Every equation bore the watermark of truth and the smell of treason. Isla walked south along the Thames, coat collar up, face unreadable. Her bishop rested in her pocket like a memory of order. She felt no triumph, only the steady pulse of equilibrium returning.
The lattice would hunt for its maker. It would find 2, and one of them had already learned how to disappear. Static.
Weeks passed, and the world kept its routine hysteria. Ministries rebranded resilience units as harmony divisions. No one admitted who authored the Lattice Directive, yet everyone quoted from it. Anonymous truths age faster than famous lies. Somewhere between Warsaw and Reykjavik, an encrypted file kept replicating itself across government servers, one line of code whispering, "Fear inqua K." The constant K flickered, never resolving. At a cafe inside Berlin Hauptbahnhof, a man with a mended coat and a healing scar on his shoulder stirred his coffee clockwise, watching news on a ceiling screen. The anchor spoke of a leak that had destabilized predictive security infrastructure. He smiled once, not pleased, not angry, just awake, cross, quiet. Check, nicely played. He left the mug half full, and on the saucer, drawn in sugar grains, was a small symbol of a bishop. Far north, on an island that never learned to hurry, a woman walked the cliffs, carrying no phone, no papers, only a notebook bound with twine. When she opened it, the first page read, "New function, Hope Tequef Attention Action." She smiled at the wind. A radio left on in a nearby cottage burst into life. A male voice, faint, digitized. "Your silence is loud, Professor." She didn't answer. She switched the radio off, then wrote one last line beneath her equation. "Let him measure this."
The lattice keeps learning. So do its ghosts. The end. Book 2 in the trilogy, coming soon. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, ring the bell, and tell your friends about my listening library.